So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the last dragon sage who could speak the Draconic tongue. Naruto x Cynthia Pokémon. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Whispering Woods. The ancient forest breathed around him, a living entity of emerald and shadow. Sunlight, fractured by the dense canopy, dappled the forest floor in shifting mosaics of gold and green. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet perfume of unseen blossoms, a heady concoction that was both alien and strangely familiar. For a being who had last drawn breath amidst the acrid smoke and blood-soaked soil of a battlefield that had claimed gods and mortals alike, this profound, untamed serenity was a disorienting balm. His name, a whisper of a memory, was Naruto. It felt like an echo from another life, a ghost on his tongue. He wore the tattered remnants of what had once been a uniform of stark black and vibrant orange, the colors now faded and torn, a testament to a struggle he could no longer recall. His body, however, was a library of scars, each a story etched into his flesh, a silent chronicle of battles fought and won. He was lean and corded with muscle, a predator's grace in his every movement. His sun-kissed blonde hair a stark contrast to the grim set of his jaw and the chilling sapphire of his eyes. Those eyes, they held the wisdom of ages and the weariness of 1,000 wars, a stark contradiction to the youthful features of his face. He had awoken in this forest with no recollection of his arrival, the past a fragmented tapestry of visceral emotions and fleeting images, the roar of a titanic beast with 9 tails, the searing pain of a hand thrust through his chest, the heart-wrenching sob of a friend, the blinding flash of light that had consumed everything. Now, there was only the forest. A world of vibrant life that felt both wondrous and threatening. He moved with a preternatural silence, his senses, honed by years of life or death conflict, cataloging every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every distant cry of a creature he did not recognize. The creatures of this world were different. They were not the summons of his past, not the chakra-infused beasts he had known. They were something else entirely, a symphony of strange and beautiful forms that hummed with an energy he could feel but not yet comprehend. His journey through the woods was not aimless. A pull, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in the very marrow of his bones, drew him northward. It was a song of power, ancient and untamed, a siren's call to a part of his soul that he had thought long dead. It was the language of dragons, a tongue he knew as intimately as his own. He was a dragon sage, the last of his kind, a title that now felt like a curse, a lonely monument to a forgotten age. It was this call that led him to a clearing, a wide, circular expanse where the ancient trees bowed in reverence to the colossal figure at its center. It was a dragon, but unlike any he had ever seen. Its body was a masterpiece of evolution, a streamlined engine of destruction and grace. Its hide was a deep, menacing blue, its underbelly a startling crimson. 2 massive, jet-like appendages sprouted from its back, and its head was adorned with 2 sharp, golden horns. A star-shaped marking of the same brilliant gold adorned its snout. It was a Garchomp, a creature of immense power, and it was wounded. A deep gash, raw and angry, marred its side, weeping a viscous, dark fluid. The beast's breathing was labored, each exhalation a pained rasp that echoed through the clearing. Its eyes, usually burning with a feral intelligence, were clouded with pain and exhaustion. Naruto approached with a caution born of respect, his hands held open in a universal gesture of peace. He did not need to speak. The Draconic tongue was a language of intent, of shared spirit. He projected a wave of calm, a gentle reassurance that he was not a threat. The Garchomp's head snapped up, its eyes narrowing, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It was a warning, a promise of swift and brutal retribution should he prove to be hostile. Naruto held his ground, his gaze unwavering. He let his own power, the dormant draconic energy that coiled around his soul, seep into his presence. It was a subtle shift, a change in the very air around him, a scent of ozone and ancient stone. The Garchomp's growl faltered, replaced by a confused whine. It recognized the energy, a primal part of its being stirring in response to the ancient call of a dragon sage. Naruto took another step forward, his voice a low, resonant hum that was more felt than heard. It was the old tongue, a language of power and majesty, a language that could command the very elements and soothe the most savage of beasts. "You are hurt, mighty one," he spoke, the words flowing from him like a river of molten gold. "Allow me to aid you." The Garchomp was stunned into silence. It had never heard this language from a human, had never felt a profound connection to one of the small, soft-skinned creatures. It watched, its initial hostility warring with a burgeoning sense of trust, as Naruto knelt beside it. His hands glowed with a soft, emerald light, a manifestation of his unique blend of chakra and draconic magic. It was a healing art, ancient and powerful, far beyond the simple medical ninjutsu of his past. He pressed his hands against the wound, and the Garchomp flinched, a pained roar escaping its jaws. But the pain was fleeting, replaced by a soothing warmth that spread through its body, knitting together torn flesh and sinew. The wound began to close, the angry red fading to a healthy pink, the bleeding slowing to a stop. The Garchomp's breathing eased, the tension draining from its massive frame. It watched Naruto, with a newfound sense of awe and gratitude, its gaze now filled with a deep, primal respect. It was in this moment of shared vulnerability and nascent trust that a new presence entered the clearing. A woman, her presence as commanding as the Garchomp's, yet tempered with an aura of scholarly grace. She was tall and elegant, with long, flowing blonde hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of spun gold. She wore a stylish black coat over a simple gray top and black pants, a practical yet fashionable ensemble that spoke of a woman who was both a field researcher and a person of considerable importance. Her eyes, a striking shade of gray, were wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and a healthy dose of scientific curiosity. This was Cynthia, the champion of the Sinnoh region, a woman whose name was spoken with reverence by trainers and scholars alike. She had been tracking the anomalous energy readings for days, a strange, powerful signature that had appeared out of nowhere in the heart of this ancient forest. The readings had led her here, to this impossible scene. A man, a stranger with an aura of immense power, healing a Garchomp with a touch, speaking to it in a language had resonated with the very soul of the world. Her hand instinctively went to the Pokeball at her belt, her own Garchomp, her trusted partner, a silent promise of protection should this stranger prove to be a threat. But she did not draw it. There was no malice in the man, no hostility in his actions. There was only a profound sense of empathy, a connection between man and Pokémon that was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Naruto felt her presence the moment she entered the clearing. He did not turn, his focus remaining on the Garchomp, but his senses were a web, a network of awareness had extended far beyond his physical body. He knew she was there, he knew she was powerful, and he knew she was not a threat. He finished his healing, the emerald light fading from his hands. The Garchomp was no longer in pain. The wound now a clean, healing scar. It nudged his shoulder with its massive head, a gesture of profound gratitude. He rose to his feet, turning to face the newcomer. He met her gaze, his sapphire eyes locking with her gray ones. The world seemed to hold its breath, the silence of the clearing punctuated only by the distant calls of unseen Pokémon. "He will live," Naruto said, his voice a calm, steady baritone that held no trace of arrogance, only a simple statement of fact. Cynthia lowered her hand from her Pokeball, her initial caution giving way to an overwhelming sense of wonder. "What you just did, the language you spoke, I've never seen anything like it. There are many things in this world that are not yet chronicled in your books, scholar," Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping over her. Taking in her attire, her posture, the keen intelligence in her eyes. "You can tell I'm a scholar just by looking at me?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Your eyes," he said, his own gaze unwavering. "They hold the hunger of knowledge, the fire of discovery." And, he added, a ghost of a smile touching his own lips, "the very expensive and impractic. For the wilderness boots are a bit of a giveaway." Cynthia looked down at her stylish black boots, a faint blush gracing her cheeks. She had to admit, he had a point. "They're comfortable," she retorted, a playful spark in her eyes. "I'm sure they are," he said, his smile widening slightly. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes, and for a moment, the weariness that had clung to him like a shroud seemed to lift. The Garchomp behind him let out a soft rumble, a sound of contentment. It was now sitting up, its gaze fixed on Cynthia, not with aggression, but with a protective stance. A clear indication that it had allied itself with the strange human who had healed it. "My name is Cynthia," she said, extending a hand. "I'm the champion of the Sinnoh region." Naruto took her hand. His grip was firm, his hand calloused. A testament to a life of hardship. "Naruto," he said, his name no longer feeling like a ghost on his tongue. "Naruto," she repeated, the name feeling strange and foreign, yet somehow fitting for the enigmatic man before her. "You have a gift, Naruto. A power I've only read about in the most ancient of legends." "A gift," he mused, his gaze turning to the Garchomp, "or a burden?" His words hung in the air, a hint of a past filled with pain and loss. Cynthia found herself wanting to know more, to understand the story behind the scars, both visible and hidden. She was a woman driven by a thirst for knowledge, and Naruto was the greatest enigma she had ever encountered. Their conversation was interrupted by the Garchomp, who nudged Naruto again, this time more insistently. It then turned its head to the north, a low rumble emanating from its chest. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his senses once again on high alert. He could feel it too, a shift in the air, a subtle disturbance in the natural energy of the forest. "What is it?" Cynthia asked, her hand once again hovering over her Pokeball. "We are not alone," Naruto said, his voice low and serious. From the shadows of the ancient trees, figures emerged. They were clad in strange, futuristic uniforms of black and red, their faces obscured by visors. They moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that spoke of military training. In their hands, they held devices that crackled with a strange, purple energy. They were not trainers, that much was clear. They were hunters. Their leader, a tall, posing figure with a cruel sneer on his face, stepped forward. "The specimen is secure," he said, his voice a cold, metallic rasp. "And it seems we have a bonus. A rare one, at that." His gaze was fixed on Naruto, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Who are you?" Cynthia demanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. The man ignored her, his attention solely on Naruto. "The Dragon Sage," he said, the words a mix of reverence and avarice. "We thought you were all but a myth." Naruto's eyes hardened, his body tensing. He had no memory of these people, yet they knew of him, of what he was. This was a threat, a direct and immediate one. "You will leave this place," Naruto said, his voice no longer calm, but laced with a chilling authority. "Now." The man chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "I'm afraid we can't do that. The Garchomp is a valuable asset. And you are a priceless artifact. You will both be coming with us." He raised his hand, and the soldiers behind him raised their weapons. The Garchomp roared, a challenge that shook the very trees. Naruto stepped in front of it, a protective barrier between the creature and the hunters. "I will not ask again," he said, his voice now a low growl that mirrored the Garchomp's. A palpable pressure emanated from him, the air crackling with his power. The commander's sneer widened. "Arrogant to the last, take them." The soldiers fired, and Ms. of purple energy shot through the clearing. But they never reached their target. A wall of wind, a swirling vortex of emerald energy, erupted from Naruto, deflecting the beams harmlessly into the surrounding trees. Cynthia watched in stunned silence. This was not the power of a Pokémon. This was something else, something raw and untamed, a force of nature personified in this one man. Naruto moved, a blur of motion that was almost too fast to follow. He was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, his movements precise and deadly. He disarmed the soldiers with a series of swift, debilitating strikes, his hands and feet a blur of motion. He was not just a mage. He was a warrior, a master of a deadly martial art that was as beautiful as it was lethal. In moments, it was over. The soldiers lay on the ground, groaning in pain, their weapons scattered and broken. The commander stared in disbelief, his arrogance replaced by a dawning sense of fear. Naruto stood before him, his eyes glowing with an inner light. The power of the Dragon Sage now fully awakened. "You have made a grave mistake," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. He raised his hand, and the ground beneath the commander erupted, a stone dragon. Its eyes burning with emerald fire, rising from the earth. It coiled around the man, its massive form a prison of living rock. "Tell me who you are," Naruto commanded, his voice echoing with the power of the earth itself. And then, you will tell me everything. The commander, his face pale with terror, could only stammer a single word, a name that would set them on a path of conflict and discovery. A name that would change the fate of this world forever. Team Galactic. As the last syllable of the name hung in the air, a new sound cut through the forest's ambience. It was the sharp, distinctive chime of a teleportation device, a sound that spoke of advanced technology and a hasty retreat. The commander, still ensnared by the stone dragon, began to glow with a faint, ethereal light. A look of smug triumph replaced the terror on his face. You may have won this skirmish, Sage, he sneered, his body starting to dematerialize, but the war has just begun. Team Galactic always gets what it wants. Naruto's eyes narrowed, a flash of frustration crossing his features. He could feel the energy signature of the teleportation, a complex weave of spatial distortion. Chi was beyond his immediate ability to counter. He could have crushed the man, squeezed the information from him, but the technology was too fast, too efficient. The stone dragon crumbled into dust as the commander's body vanished completely, leaving only the faint, lingering scent of ozone. The remaining soldiers, seeing their leaders escape, activated their own personal teleporters, their bodies dissolving into shimmering light. In a matter of seconds, the clearing was empty once more, save for Naruto, Cynthia, and the now recovered Garchomp. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. Cynthia finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations and scholarly analysis, was struggling to process what she had just witnessed. She had seen power before, the raw, untamed might of legendary Pokémon, the focused, disciplined strength of a champion's team. But this was different. It was a power that was both ancient and deeply personal, a force that was a part of the man himself, not just a creature he commanded. Team Galactic, she said, her voice a mixture of anger and concern. I thought they were disbanded years ago, after Cyrus's defeat at Spear Pillar. Naruto turned to her, his expression grim. The inner light in his eyes had faded, replaced once more by the weary wisdom of an old soul. They knew me, he said, his voice a low, contemplative rumble. They called me a dragon sage. The legends, they speak of sages who could command dragons, who could shape the very earth and sky, Cynthia said, her scholarly instincts taking over. But they were always just that, legends. Stories to explain the power of legendary Pokémon. Some legends are born from truth, Naruto said, his gaze distant. As if he were looking at a world she could not see. He placed a hand on the Garchomp's head, a silent communion passing between them. The great beast leaned into his touch, a gesture of absolute trust. Cynthia watched the interaction, a thousand questions swirling in her mind. Who was this man? Where did he come from? What was the source of his incredible power? And what was his connection to the revived Team Galactic? She knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that she was on the precipice of a discovery that would rewrite the history of her world. You're not from this world, are you? She asked, the question more of a statement than an inquiry. Naruto's gaze returned to her, his sapphire eyes holding a universe of untold stories. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. No, he admitted, his voice quiet. I am not. The admission hung in the air, a profound and world-altering truth. It explained so much, yet it opened the door to so many more questions. Cynthia, a woman who had dedicated her life to uncovering the secrets of the past, found herself standing before a living, breathing anachronism, a key to a history she had never even dreamed existed. Then you are alone, she said, her voice soft with a surprising amount of empathy. She, too, knew the loneliness of being at the pinnacle of power, of being set apart from others by her own unique abilities. Naruto's expression softened, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected suspicion, fear, perhaps even hostility. He had not expected understanding. I am, he confirmed. Not anymore, she said, a determined glint in her gray eyes. Team Galactic is a threat to this world, a threat I have a responsibility to stop. And it seems you are at the center of their new plans. We have a common enemy, Naruto, and I believe we can help each other. She extended her hand once more, not as a champion to a stranger, but as a potential ally, a partner in the storm that was gathering on the horizon. "Work with me," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that was as powerful as any Pokémon's attack. "Help me understand what's happening, and I will help you find your place in this world, and perhaps a way back to your own." Naruto looked at her outstretched hand, then into her eyes. He saw no deception, no hidden agenda. He saw only a fierce intelligence, a strong sense of justice, and a genuine desire to help. In this strange, new world, he was adrift, a warrior without a war, a sage without a purpose. But now, a new purpose had found him. A new battle was brewing, and he would not face it alone. He took her hand, his grip firm and resolute. "I will," he said, a single, powerful promise that sealed their alliance. The Garchomp let out a mighty roar, a sound that was not of challenge, but of acclamation. It was the sound of a new legend being born, a legend of a dragon sage and a champion, a legend that would be whispered in the rustling leaves of the whispering woods for generations to come. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Naruto, Cynthia, and their new draconic companion began their journey, a journey that would take them from the quiet serenity of the ancient forest to the heart of a conspiracy that threatened to tear their world apart. They walked side by side, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. Their first steps on a path that would forever intertwine their destinies. The Whispering Woods had borne witness to the arrival of a legend, and now, it watched as that legend began to unfold. The journey out of the woods was a silent one, a shared space of contemplation as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The Garchomp, now fiercely loyal to Naruto, walked beside him, its massive form a comforting presence in the deepening twilight. Cynthia, for her part, was a whirlwind of thoughts, her mind racing to connect the dots, to formulate a plan of action. Team Galactic's resurgence was a grave concern, but it was the man walking beside her who occupied the majority of her thoughts. He was a puzzle she was determined to solve, a living piece of history that defied all known scientific and historical precedent. They made camp for the night in a small, sheltered cove by a clear, gurgling stream. Naruto, with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years spent living off the land, started a fire with a single, controlled burst of flame from his fingertips, a feat that once again left Cynthia momentarily speechless. He then moved to the stream, his movements a blur as he snatched several large, wriggling fish from the water with his bare hands. He cleaned and cooked them over the fire, the simple meal a welcome comfort after the day's tumultuous events. As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them. It was not an awkward silence, but one of mutual respect and understanding. They were two powerful individuals, each accustomed to a certain degree of solitude. Yet in this shared moment, they found a sense of camaraderie, a nascent friendship forged in the crucible of a shared threat. "So," Cynthia finally said, breaking the silence, "a dragon sage. What does that mean, exactly? In your world?" Naruto swallowed a piece of fish, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames of the fire. "It means, I am a bridge," he said, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble. "A bridge between the world of men and the world of dragons. We were peacekeepers, mediators, protectors of the balance." He paused, a shadow of an old pain crossing his features. "And now, I am the last. What happened to the others?" Cynthia asked, her voice gentle, not wanting to pry, but unable to suppress her insatiable curiosity. Naruto was silent for a long moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound. "War," he finally said, the single word heavy with a world of loss. "A war that consumed everything. Gods, men, and dragons alike. I am all that is left." Cynthia's heart ached for him, for the unimaginable loss he must have endured. To be the sole survivor of a world-ending conflict, to be cast adrift in a strange new land, it was a burden she could not even begin to comprehend. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling inadequate, but spoken with genuine sincerity. Naruto looked at her, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain in his eyes told a different story. "And now I have a new purpose. A new world to protect." His words resonated with her, a shared sense of duty that transcended their different origins. She, too, was a protector, a guardian of her world. In that moment, She knew that their alliance was more than just a matter of convenience. It was a meeting of kindred spirits. They spoke for hours, their conversation flowing from the history of the dragon sages to the complexities of the Pokémon world. Naruto was a quick study, his keen intellect absorbing the information she provided with an almost preternatural speed. He learned of the Pokémon League, the gym leaders, the Elite Four, the various criminal organizations that had plagued the regions over the years. Cynthia, in turn, learned of a world of chakra, of ninjas, of tailed beasts and epic battles that made the conflicts of her own world seem like minor squabbles. As the night deepened, and the stars painted the sky, in a breathtaking tapestry of silver and black, a sense of easy familiarity grew between them. They were no longer just a champion and a mysterious stranger. They were Naruto and Cynthia, two souls from different worlds, united by a common cause and a burgeoning sense of mutual respect and admiration. The Garchomp, curled up by the fire, let out a soft, contented sigh, its dreams filled with the emerald light of healing and the resonant hum of the Draconic tongue. It knew, with a certainty that was as old as the mountains, that it had found its sage, its partner, its friend. And it would follow him to the ends of this world, and beyond. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Sunnyshore Anomaly. The transition from the primeval quiet of the Whispering Woods to the vibrant, humming metropolis of Sunny's Horror City was a sensory shock of the highest order. For Naruto, a man whose life had been spent in villages of wood and stone or on battlefields of churned earth, the city was a breathtaking, almost overwhelming spectacle of glass, steel, and light. It was a city powered by the sun, a testament to a level of technological advancement he had only ever glimpsed in the most fantastical of fictions. Towering skyscrapers, their surfaces covered in a mosaic of shimmering solar panels, reached for a sky that was perpetually clear and blue, untainted by the smoke and smog of cruder power sources. Elevated walkways, transparent tubes of hardened glass, crisscrossed the cityscape, with people gliding along on silent, moving platforms. The air itself felt different, clean and charged with a subtle, crackling energy that tickled his senses. It was a world away from the earthy, organic scent of the forest, a sterile, yet invigorating aroma of ozone and polished metal. Cynthia, ever the gracious guide, navigated the city's intricate pathways with an easy familiarity. She observed Naruto's reactions with a quiet, academic fascination. He wasn't gawking like a simple-minded rustic. His sapphire eyes were constantly moving, analyzing, deconstructing. He noted the flow of traffic, the design of the solar collectors, the seamless integration of technology in daily life. He was a warrior in a scholar's paradise, his mind processing the strategic implications of such a city, its power sources, its vulnerabilities, its defenses. He moved with a coiled grace, a predator at ease in a gilded cage, his presence a stark, anachronistic contrast to the sleek, modern world around him. The Garchomp, having been returned to its Pokeball to avoid causing a citywide panic, was a comforting weight at his side. A tangible link to the more primal world he understood. Their destination was the Sunnyshore Gym, a monumental structure that looked less like a battle arena and more like a futuristic power plant. A massive, golden lighthouse, its peak crowned with a colossal, multifaceted lens, dominated the building's design. It was a monument to both electricity and ego, a fitting home for the man Cynthia described as brilliant, but chronically uninspired. Volkner is the best there is when it comes to electrical engineering and energy analysis, Cynthia explained as they approached the gym's automated glass doors, which hissed open to welcome them. He designed the city's entire power grid. But difficult. He's been a gym leader for years, and the lack of a real challenge has left him perpetually bored. Don't be surprised if less than welcoming. Naruto merely grunted in response. He had dealt with his fair share of difficult, arrogant geniuses in his lifetime. They were often the most useful, provided you knew which buttons to push. The interior of the gym was a cavernous space, a labyrinth of whirring generators, crackling transformers, and catwalks suspended over a vast, seemingly bottomless chasm. The air hummed with raw power, a symphony of controlled electricity that made the hairs on Naruto's arms stand on end. At the center of it all, on a raised platform that served as the battlefield, a lone figure was silhouetted against the bright glare of a massive viewscreen displaying complex energy schematics. He was a young man, likely no older than Naruto in appearance. with a shock of unruly blonde hair that seemed to defy gravity and a pair of tired, intelligent blue eyes. He was tall and lanky, dressed in a simple blue and yellow jumpsuit that looked more like a mechanic's uniform than a gym leader's attire. He didn't turn as they approached, his attention utterly captivated by the data scrolling across the screen. "Cynthia," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any real enthusiasm. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Did you finally find a trainer strong enough to make me break a sweat? Or did you just get tired of pretending to be interested in ancient ruins?" Cynthia's smile was tight, a practiced expression of patience. "It's good to see you too, Volkner. I have a problem, one I think you'll find stimulating." Volkner finally turned, his gaze sweeping over Cynthia before landing on Naruto. He arched a skeptical eyebrow, his eyes lingering on the tattered remains of Naruto's uniform and the quiet, dangerous aura that clung to him like a second skin. It was an aura Volkner recognized, not from any trainer, but from the legendary Pokémon he had only read about, a sense of ancient, untamed power. "And who is this?" Volkner asked, his tone shifting from bored to intrigued. "Your new bodyguard. He looks like he's seen a few more battles than the average Pokémon trainer." "This is Naruto," Cynthia said, her voice firm. "And he's the reason I'm here. We had a run-in with Team Galactic." That got Volkner's full attention. The boredom vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. Team Galactic. Impossible. Cyrus was lost in the distortion world. The organization was dismantled. "It seems they've found a new leader and some new technology," Cynthia said, producing a small, sophisticated device from her coat. She projected a holographic image into the air between them, a detailed analysis of the energy signature from the commander's teleporter. "This is residual energy from their teleportation tech. It's unstable, and the spatial distortion it creates is unlike anything I've ever seen. I need you to analyze it." Volkner's eyes lit up with a genuine, almost manic glee. He stepped forward, his fingers dancing through the holographic display, absorbing the complex data with an incredible speed. "Fascinating," he breathed, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. "This isn't just teleportation, this is dimensional tearing on a micro scale. The energy source is alien, extra-dimensional. This is beautiful." He turned his intense gaze back to Naruto. "Cynthia, you don't bring a man like him to me just because you fought some grunts with fancy toys. What's his part in this?" Before Cynthia could answer, Naruto spoke, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to Volkner's manic energy. "They were hunting me," he said simply. "And the Garchomp that travels with me. They called me a dragon sage." Volkner's grin widened. "A dragon sage, so the old myths have teeth after all. A being who can command dragons. I've always wondered about the theoretical basis for such a thing. Is it pheromonal, sonic resonance, a psychic link that bypasses the normal channels of Pokémon communication?" "It is a language," Naruto stated, not bothering to elaborate further. The mystery, he knew, would be far more enticing to a man like Volkner than a simple explanation. "A language," Volkner mused, circling Naruto like a luxray studying its prey. "And what else can this language do? What are you capable of, I wonder?" The challenge was clear in his voice, the hunger for a new, exciting stimulus. "Cynthia brought me a puzzle, but you are an enigma. I want to see what you can do." "A demonstration." Cynthia opened her mouth to protest, but Naruto held up a hand, silencing her. He understood. Volkner wasn't just being arrogant, he was testing him, gauging his worthiness. To gain the full cooperation of a man like this, he needed to provide more than just an interesting problem. He needed to provide a spectacle. "A demonstration," Naruto agreed, a faint smile touching his lips. "What did you have in mind?" Volkner's grin was electric. "A battle, of course. Not one of your Pokémon against mine. That would be predictable. No, I want to see you, the Dragon Sage, against one of my most powerful partners. Let's see if your ancient magic can stand up to a few million volts of pure, unadulterated power." He snapped his fingers, and a section of the battlefield platform retracted, revealing a gleaming Pokeball. He picked it up, enlarging it with a practiced flick of his wrist. "Let's begin the experiment, Electivire. Let's give our guest a proper Sunyshore welcome." He threw the ball, and it burst open in a flash of brilliant light. A massive, imposing creature materialized on the battlefield. It was a bulky, ape-like Pokémon, covered in thick yellow fur with black stripes. Two long, whip-like tails tipped with red spheres crackled with untamed electricity. It slammed its fists together, and arcs of lightning danced between them. Its roar a thunderous challenge that echoed through the vast gym. It was a creature of pure, raw power, an embodiment of the electrical energy that filled the very air. Naruto stood his ground, unfazed by the intimidating display. He looked at the Electivire, not as an opponent to be beaten, but as a force of nature to be understood. He could feel the electricity coiling within it, the powerful, rhythmic hum of its internal generator. "You're certain about this?" Cynthia asked, her voice laced with concern. An Electivire at this level was a dangerous foe for any Pokémon, let alone an unarmed human. "Certainty is the death of discovery," Cynthia, Volkner said, his eyes gleaming. "Let's see what happens when a myth meets a thunderstorm." Naruto took a step forward onto the battlefield, his tattered cloak billowing slightly in the electrical currents generated by the Electivire. He had no weapon, no armor, just the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down gods. He wouldn't use his Rasengan or his Sage Mode in its truest sense. That was overkill, a sledgehammer for a scalpel's work. He would show Volkner a different kind of power, a subtler, more profound control. "Ready when you are," Naruto said, his voice calm. "Electivire, Thunder Punch, full power," Volkner commanded, his boredom completely forgotten, replaced by the thrill of a new and exciting challenge. The Electivire roared and charged, its massive fist enveloped in a crackling sphere of pure lightning. It moved with surprising speed for its size, the very floor plates of the GYM vibrating with its thundering approach. It was a direct, overwhelming assault, designed to end the fight before it could even begin. But Naruto didn't move to dodge. He didn't brace for impact. He simply stood there, his sapphire eyes focused, his lips parting to utter a single, resonant word. It was a word of the Draconic tongue, a word that did not mean, stop, or defend. It was a word that meant, ground. It was not a command directed at the Electivire. It was a command directed at the world itself. For a fraction of a second, the natural flow of energy in the gym was altered. The very air, charged with ambient electricity from Volkner's generators, suddenly became a massive, invisible conductor. The millions of volts contained in the Electivire's Thunder Punch, instead of striking Naruto, were harmlessly rerouted, drawn away from him and into the metal floor of the battlefield, discharging with a deafening crack that left a scorched, blackened crater several feet to his left. The Electivire, its powerful attack having dissipated into nothingness, stumbled forward, its momentum carrying it past Naruto. It looked back in confusion, its simple, primal mind unable to comprehend how its unstoppable attack had simply failed. Volkner's jaw was agape, his analytical mind, which could process quantum mechanics and advanced energy theory in seconds, was completely short-circuited. It wasn't a shield, it wasn't an evasion. The attack had been redirected, grounded, by a single word. "How?" Volkner stammered, his voice a disbelieving whisper. Naruto didn't answer. He took another step forward, his hand raised. Not in a threat, but in a gesture of invitation. He spoke another word, this one meaning, attract. He was targeting the two long tails of the Electivire, which were now whipping back and forth in agitation. He subtly manipulated the polarity of the static electricity gathering on their surfaces. The Electivire's tails, suddenly imbued with a powerful, opposing magnetic charge, snapped together, tangling and short-circuiting each other with a shower of sparks. The Pokémon cried out in surprise and pain, stumbling and trying to untangle its own appendages, its primary weapons now turned against itself. "He's not controlling the Pokémon," Cynthia breathed, her eyes wide with revelation. "He's controlling the environment, the energy around the Pokémon." As a paradigm shift in her understanding of power. Trainers commanded their Pokémon, who in turn commanded the elements. Naruto was bypassing the middleman entirely. He was speaking to the elements themselves. "Incredible," Volkner whispered, his excitement reaching a fever pitch. "Electivire, use Giga Impact. Overwhelm him with pure force." The Electivire, finally entangling its tails, roared in frustration. Its body became enveloped in a massive, swirling aura of purple and yellow energy. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing attack, a physical manifestation of its immense power. It became a living meteor, launching itself at Naruto, the air itself screaming in protest at its passage. This time, Naruto moved. But not to attack. He took a deep breath, his hands forming a single, simple hand sign from his past life, the Ram seal. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. He spoke a final word, a whisper that was almost lost in the roar of the Giga Impact. But a word that resonated with the very fabric of the gym. It was a word that meant balance. He wasn't creating a shield. He wasn't redirecting the energy. He was harmonizing it. He reached out with his own draconic energy, not to clash with the Giga Impact, but to meet it, to embrace it, to find its resonant frequency. The swirling, chaotic energy of the attack, upon reaching him, did not explode. It calmed. The violent, destructive aura smoothed out, the colors softened, and the immense kinetic force was gently, impossibly, absorbed into his body. For a moment, Naruto glowed with the same purple and yellow energy, the power of the Giga Impact flowing through him, not harming him, but simply passing through him as if he were a conduit. The energy then flowed out from his feet and into the floor, dissipating harmlessly into the gym's massive grounding system. The Electivire, its momentum and energy completely spent, collapsed at Naruto's feet, panting and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. It looked up at the strange, calm human who had not fought it, but had simply accepted its greatest attack and turned it into nothing. Silence. A profound, echoing silence filled the massive gym, broken only by the hum of the generators that now seemed strangely muted. Volkner stared, his brilliant mind utterly broken and then rebuilt in the span of a few seconds. He had sought a challenge, a new stimulus to break his boredom. He had been given a revelation that shattered his entire understanding of what power was. This was not the brute force of Pokémon, nor the elegant logic of science. This was something else entirely. This was art. He slowly began to clap, a single, sharp sound that echoed in the cavernous space. Then another, and another, until he was applauding with a genuine, unrestrained enthusiasm that Cynthia had not seen from him in years. Magnificent, Volkner said, his voice filled with a newfound energy. Absolutely, unequivocally magnificent. You're not just a sage, Naruto. You're a paradigm shift. The analysis of that teleportation signature is yours. My lab, my resources, my mind, they are all at your disposal. Naruto gave a slight bow of his head, accepting the praise with a quiet grace. The glow faded from his eyes, and he was once again just a man, albeit a man who had just tamed a thunderstorm with a whisper. He knelt down and placed a hand on the Electivire's head. A faint, soothing energy flowed from his palm, easing the Pokémon's exhaustion. The great beast, which had been ready to tear him apart moments before, leaned into his touch. A low rumble of respect emanating from its chest. With Volkner's full, enthusiastic cooperation, the analysis of the Team Galactic Energy signature proceeded at a blistering pace. What would have taken Cynthia weeks of work, Volkner's supercomputers, guided by his intuitive genius, processed in a matter of hours. The results were both fascinating and deeply troubling. The energy source is definitely extra-dimensional, Volkner confirmed, pointing to a complex, rotating schematic on his main screen. It's highly unstable, but when focused, it allows for near instantaneous travel. But that's not the most interesting part. The teleportation isn't random. It leaves a residue, a faint signal echo, and that echo is being repeated, like a beacon, from a single, remote location. He manipulated the controls, and a map of the Sinnoh region appeared on the screen. A single point on a remote island to the west began to blink red. Iron Island, Cynthia said, her voice tight with concern. It's known for its rich ore deposits and strong, localized magnetic fields. It was the site of an old ore processing facility, but it was abandoned decades ago. A perfect place for a secret base, Volkner mused. Remote, difficult to access, and the island's natural magnetic fields would help mask any energy signatures they're putting out. It's clever. Then that's where we're going, Naruto stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Their planning session was interrupted by the chime of the gym's visitor alert. A female voice, soft and polite, filtered through the intercom. Volkner, it's Jasmine. Cynthia asked me to meet her here. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Cynthia's face brightened. Jasmine, perfect timing. Let her in, Volkner. Volkner grumbled something about his lab not being a social club, but he keyed the controls to open the main doors. A few moments later, a new figure entered the control room. She was a woman whose gentle, serene presence seemed to instantly calm the electrically charged atmosphere of the gym. She had long, light brown hair tied in 2 loops, and her kind, hazel eyes radiated a quiet empathy. She was dressed in a simple, elegant teal dress, and she carried herself with a shy, unassuming grace. This was Jasmine, the Steel-type gym leader of Olivine City in the Johto region. At her side, a massive, metallic Pokémon, a Steelix, materialized from its Pokeball, its serpentine body coiling protectively around its gentle trainer. Cynthia, it's good to see you, Jasmine said, her voice as soft as her demeanor. Her gaze then fell upon Naruto, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible start. She wasn't looking at his tattered clothes or the scars, but at the aura of profound calm that surrounded him, a stark contrast to the barely contained storm of power she could also sense within him. Her empathetic nature, finely tuned to the feelings of both people and Pokémon, was picking up something extraordinary from him, a deep well of ancient sorrow, but also an unshakable core of resolute strength. Jasmine, thank you for coming on such short notice, Cynthia said. This is Naruto. We have a situation, and our expertise with steel types and mineralogy is going to be invaluable. Jasmine's gaze lingered on Naruto for a moment longer before she turned back to Cynthia. You mentioned on the phone that the Saint Eel-type Pokémon near Sunyshore have been agitated. My own Steelix has been restless ever since we arrived. The great steel serpent beside her let out a low, grinding rumble, confirming her words. We believe it's connected to this, Volkner said, bringing the image of the extra-dimensional energy signature back onto the screen. This energy is causing fluctuations in the local magnetic fields. Most Pokémon wouldn't notice it, but for highly sensitive steel types, it must feel like a constant, high-pitched scream. Jasmine's gentle features hardened with a quiet determination. Then we must stop it. Pokémon should not have to suffer because of the reckless actions of humans. Her eyes met Naruto's again, and she saw in them a reflection of her own conviction. He understood, on a fundamental level, the sanctity of the natural world and the creatures within it. Our investigation is leading us to Iron Island, Cynthia explained. We believe Team Galactic has established a base there. Jasmine, I was hoping you would accompany us. Your connection with steel types could help us navigate the island and understand the effects of this energy more deeply. Of course, Jasmine said without hesitation. I will help in any way I can. I'll stay here, Volkner announced, already turning back to his consoles. My skills are of more use here, providing tactical support and analyzing any data you can send me. Besides, he added with a grin, someone needs to run the city. And I have a few new theories I need to test. His eyes flickered towards Naruto, a clear indication that his scientific curiosity was now burning brighter than ever. And so, a team was formed. A champion of unparalleled skill, a sage from another world, and an empathic master of steel. They were an unlikely trio, brought together by the resurgence of an old enemy and the appearance of a new, profound mystery. As they prepared for their journey to the desolate, magnetic shores of Iron Island, Naruto found himself once again with allies at his side. A shared purpose solidifying his place in this new, vibrant world. The quiet, gentle strength of Jasmine was a soothing balm to his warrior's soul, a different kind of strength than Cynthia's fierce determination, but one he found himself inexplicably drawn to. The threads of destiny were weaving a complex and beautiful tapestry, and his was now inextricably linked with those of these two remarkable women. The anomaly in Sunyshore had been identified, but the true battle, the one that would be fought on the iron-rich soil of a lonely island, was only just beginning. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Screaming Stone. The sea journey to Iron Island was a study in shifting atmospheres. They had chartered a small, sturdy fishing vessel from the Sunyshore docks. Its captain a grizzled old salt who asked no questions as long as the credits were good. As they left the glittering, sun-drenched city behind, the world transformed. The sky, a perfect, unbroken cerulean over the metropolis, began to take on a harder, more metallic sheen. The playful chop of the waves gave way to a deeper, more ominous swell, the water turning from a sparkling turquoise to a sullen, gunmetal gray. The air grew heavy, thick with the taste of salt and iron, and a low, almost subsonic hum began to vibrate through the hull of the boat, a constant, oppressive thrum that seemed to burrow directly into one's bones. Naruto stood at the prow, his feet planted firmly on the pitching deck, his tattered cloak snapping in the wind. He was a figure of profound stillness amidst the ocean's turmoil. His senses, far more acute than a normal human's, were already dissecting the island's influence. He could feel the magnetic field, a chaotic, screaming thing that was fundamentally wrong. It was a corruption of the natural order, a discordant note in the planet's symphony. Cynthia was at the stern, her high-tech Pokédex out, its sensors working overtime to quantify the anomaly. She was in her element. The analytical strategist, her mind processing data streams, correlating magnetic flux readings with geological surveys of the island. She was a force of focused intellect, her gaze sharp and discerning as she stared at the dark smudge on the horizon that was their destination. Jasmine, however, was struggling. She sat on a bench near the boat's small cabin, her eyes closed, her hands pressed against her temples. Her normally serene face was pale and drawn. Beside her, the colossal form of her Steelix, contained within its heavy ball, was causing the device to vibrate and hum with a distressed energy. Jasmine's empathy, her greatest gift, was now a source of profound torment. She was not just hearing the island's hum, she was feeling it, a psychic shriek of pain that as being broadcast by every atom of iron on their destination. It's like 1,000 voices crying out at once, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper against the wind and waves. The land itself is in agony. Naruto turned from the prow, his gaze softening as it fell upon her. He had seen this kind of pain before, in summoned animals forced to fight against their will, in tailed beasts chained and used as weapons. He understood the unique torture of feeling the suffering of others as if it were your own. He walked over to her, his movements fluid and certain despite the rocking of the boat. He knelt before her, his presence a sudden, calming anchor in the sensory storm. "Focus on my voice," he said, his tone low and resonant, imbued with a subtle draconic power. It was not a command, but a guide, a single, clear note in the cacophony. "Breathe. Match your rhythm to mine." He placed a hand on the vibrating heavy ball at her waist. He did not try to suppress the energy. Instead, he channeled a tiny fraction of his own. A whisper of the earth's true, balanced song. He spoke a single word in the draconic tongue, a word that meant, center. A deep, grounding calm flowed from his hand, through the Pokeball, and into Jasmine. The frantic vibrations lessened, and the pained expression on her face began to ease. She opened her eyes, her hazel gaze meeting his sapphire one. She saw in them not pity, but a deep, shared understanding. How did you do that?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "The world is meant to have a rhythm, a harmony," he explained quietly. "This place, its song is broken. I am merely reminding the stone of its true nature." Cynthia had lowered her Pokédex, observing the interaction with a thoughtful, unreadable expression. She had approached the problem with science and data, trying to analyze and defeat the anomaly. Naruto had approached it with empathy and a form of spiritual healing. It was a methodology completely alien to her, yet undeniably effective. She felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, not jealousy, but a dawning realization that the world was infinitely more complex than her encyclopedias and archaeological digs had ever led her to believe. As the island loomed larger, its oppressive nature became a physical weight. The shoreline was not sand, but a fine, black grid of pulverized iron ore that clung to everything. Skeletal, rust-red structures of the abandoned processing plant clawed at the sky like the ribs of some long-dead metal beast. The very air seemed to shimmer with a visible distortion, a heat haze that had nothing to do with temperature. The moment Jasmine stepped onto the shore, she let her Steelix out. The great serpent burst forth, its massive, armored body seeming to drink in the metallic air. But instead of the calm, protective presence it usually projected, it let out a grinding roar of pure agony. Its silver body contorted, and its red eyes glowed with a feverish light as it thrashed its tail, smashing a nearby rock formation into powder. It was in pain, its internal magnetic compass thrown into violent chaos by the island's corrupted field. Steelix! Jasmine cried out, her own pain mirroring her Pokemon's. Cynthia immediately reached for her Garchomp's Pokeball. We have to contain it. No, Naruto commanded, his voice sharp with authority. He stepped between them and the thrashing Steelix, his hand raised. Fighting it will only cause more pain. He closed his eyes and slammed his open palm onto the iron-rich ground. Ryu no Dote. Chikyu no Choa. Dragon Sage Art. Harmony of the Earth. It was not a destructive technique. There was no explosion, no shattering of rock. Instead, a wave of profound, invisible energy radiated outwards from him in a perfect circle, about 50 feet in diameter. Within this circle, the oppressive hum ceased. The shimmering distortion in the air vanished. The very ground seemed to sigh in relief. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The thrashing Steelix froze, its massive body falling within the circle of calm. The feverish light in its eyes faded, and it let out a low, confused, but relieved rumble. It turned its massive head towards Naruto, no longer seeing a threat, but the source of its relief. It slowly, cautiously, slithered towards him and rested its head on the ground near his feet, a gesture of complete submission and gratitude. Jasmine stared, her heart pounding in her chest. He hadn't just calmed her Pokémon, he had healed a piece of the world itself. He had created a sanctuary, an island of peace in a sea of torment. She looked at him, at this man who commanded the very earth with a whisper, who showed such profound compassion for a suffering creature, and felt a connection, a deep and powerful resonance that went far beyond mere admiration. Cynthia, too, was stunned. She lowered her hand, her strategic mind once again forced to re-evaluate everything she thought she knew. His power was not just for combat. It was restorative, protective. It was the power of a true guardian. This is the work of Team Galactic, Naruto said, his voice grim as he surveyed the tortured landscape beyond his circle of calm. They are not just drawing power from this place. They are poisoning it. The old processing plant is deep in the center of the island, Cynthia said, her focus returning to the mission. She brought up a schematic on her device. It's a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers. The base must be hidden within it. The Pokémon on this island, they will all be like Steelix was, Jasmine said. Her hand resting on her partner's now calm body. Driven mad by the pain. We cannot simply fight our way through. We won't have to, Naruto replied. He kept one hand on the ground, maintaining his sanctuary. Jasmine, you will be our guide. Feel the pain. Lead us towards its source. Cynthia, you will be our map. Guide us through the man-made structures. I will be the shield. I will keep the madness at bay. It was a simple, effective plan, one that utilized each of their unique strengths. They moved out, a small island of tranquility moving through a corrupted world. Jasmine, her senses now clear within Naruto's aura, could pinpoint the concentrations of pained Pokémon. Cynthia navigated the decaying industrial maze with unerring accuracy. And Naruto, the epicenter of their expedition, walked with a focused serenity. His power a constant, protective presence. They encountered other Pokémon. Eren and Lyron chewing on rusted girders in a mindless frenzy, their bodies sparking with the unnatural energy, a herd of onyx. Their rock bodies grinding against each other in a cacophony of agony. Each time, Naruto would extend his aura of calm, and the creatures would cease their pain thrashing. Looking at the trio not as intruders, but as a source of welcome relief. They didn't attack. They simply moved aside, allowing them to pass. It was a surreal, silent pilgrimage through a gallery of suffering. They finally reached the heart of the old plant, a massive, cavernous chamber that had once housed a colossal ore smelter. The air here was thick with the smell of ozone, and the hum was so intense it was almost a physical blow. In the center of the chamber, where the smelter should have been, was a structure that did not belong. It was a sleek, black metal wall, smooth and featureless save for a single, almost invisible seam. It pulsed with a faint, purple light, the source of the island's corruption. The entrance, Cynthia breathed. The energy readings are off the charts. As they approached, the wall shimmered. 2 panels slid aside, revealing automated defense turrets. They whirred to life, their barrels glowing with the same unstable, extra-dimensional energy as the teleporters. Steelix, iron defense, Jasmine commanded. Her Pokémon, now calm and focused, moved in front of the group, its body glowing with a metallic sheen as its already formidable defenses were bolstered. The turrets fired, unleashing crackling beams of purple energy. The beams slammed into Steelix, which roared as it held its ground, the attacks scarring its metallic hide but failing to break through. They're drawing power directly from the gate. Cynthia yelled over the din. We need to disable them at their source. Naruto's eyes scanned the turrets. He saw the energy conduits snaking along the walls, feeding the weapons. Brute force would be slow and dangerous. He needed precision. He looked at the rusted, decaying infrastructure around them, the girders, the catwalks, the machinery that had been left to rot for decades. The entire chamber was a weapon waiting to be used. He formed a hand seal, a gesture of command. He spoke a word in the Draconic tongue, a word of power that meant, unravel. It was not an explosion. It was a deconstruction. The rusted bolts on a massive girder directly above the turrets instantly corroded into dust. The huge beam of steel, weighing dozens of tons, groaned and then fell with a deafening crash, crushing both turrets into a twisted mess of scrap metal. The silence that followed was shocking in its suddenness. Jasmine and Cynthia stared, one with awe, the other with a look of profound analytical shock. He hadn't used a jutsu. He hadn't thrown anything. He had simply commanded the metal to fail. The seamless door hissed open, not as a welcome, but as an invitation into a trap. The oppressive hum was gone, replaced by the clean, sterile hum of a high-tech laboratory. The interior was a stark contrast to the decaying ruin outside, all white walls, glowing consoles, and holographic displays. In the center of the vast, circular chamber was the source of it all. It was a pulsating, swirling vortex of purple and black energy, a tear in the very fabric of reality. Held stable by an array of humming, technologically advanced pylons. This was no mere energy source, it was a gateway. Standing before the gateway, her back to them, was a woman in the uniform of a Team Galactic commander. Her uniform was a sleeker, more advanced version of the one the grunts had worn, and her long, silver hair was tied in a severe, practical ponytail. She turned as they entered, and a cold, calculating smile touched her lips. Her eyes, the color of amethyst, held no malice, only the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a new specimen. Cynthia, champion of Sinnoh. Jasmine, the empath of Johto, she said, her voice a calm, clinical monotone. Your arrival is precisely on schedule. Her gaze then shifted, landing on Naruto, and her smile widened. And the anomaly, the dragon sage, specimen 0. Your energy signature is even more magnificent up close. A perfect, self-sustaining biological reactor. You are the key. Who are you? Cynthia demanded, her hand moving to her Garchomp's Pokeball. I am Commander Lyra, Chief of Extra-Dimensional Research for the new Team Galactic, the woman replied, her tone never wavering from its cold, analytical calm. And you have walked right into my laboratory. The seamless door behind them slammed shut with a deafening clang of finality, plunging the entrance into darkness. Emergency IGHTS cast the chamber in a blood-red glow. My master will be so pleased, Lyra continued, gesturing towards the swirling portal. We have been trying to stabilize the gateway for his return, but the power requirements were immense. We were forced to bleed this island dry simply to maintain this fragile aperture. But your power is stable, organic. With you as a power source, we can open the gate wide enough to bring his new world through. She raised a hand, and from a hidden compartment in the floor, a Pokeball rose on a platform. It was a dark, menacing black, unlike any they had seen before. I have been studying the effects of the portal's energy on Pokémon physiology. The results have been enlightening. Allow me to demonstrate. She threw the ball. It didn't open with a flash of light, but with a sea lie of shadowy energy. The creature that emerged was a terrifying fusion of biology and corrupted technology. It was a Metagross, but its silver armor was blackened and scorched, its 4 legs were fused into a hovering platform of jagged metal. Wires and conduits snaked across its body, pulsing with the same purple energy as the portal, and its red eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent intelligence. It was a perversion of a noble Pokémon, twisted into a living weapon. This is only the beginning, Lyra said, her voice laced with the thrill of discovery. Now, shall we begin the experiment? The corrupted Metagross let out a screech that was a discordant mix of grinding metal and psychic static, its cold gaze locking onto Naruto. The trap was sprung, the enemy revealed, and the true, horrifying scope of Team Galactic's plan was laid bare. They were not just trying to conquer the world, they were trying to replace it. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Corrupted Compass. The world bled red. The emergency lighting painted the sterile white laboratory in crimson hues, turning pristine surfaces into something visceral and alarming. The air, once merely humming with contained power, now thrummed with a palpable menace. The only sound, for a frozen second, was the low, guttural thrum of the dimensional gateway and the discordant, metallic screech that tore from the corrupted Metagross. It was a sound of tortured machinery and a psychic scream of a mind at war with itself, a noise that scraped at the soul. Fascinating, isn't it? Commander Lyra's voice was an Isla. ND of unnerving calm in the sea of chaos. By introducing a controlled stream of extra-dimensional energy directly into its neural network, we've bypassed the need for conventional evolution. We have achieved a higher state of being. Power. Purified. There was no time for debate, no room for shock. Cynthia reacted with the instantaneous, decisive clarity that had made her a champion. Garchomp. Now. Dragon Rush. The Pokeball on her belt burst open, and her own magnificent land shark dragon erupted into the chamber, its roar a defiant challenge to the unnatural creature before them. Wreathed in a shimmering, draconic blue aura, Garchomp shot across the room like a living missile, a blur of controlled, righteous fury aimed directly at the heart of the abomination. Simultaneously, Jasmine gave her own command, her voice trembling but firm. Steelix, you too. Iron Head. Her colossal steel serpent, having already borne the brunt of the island's pain, surged forward with a vengeful momentum. Its massive head glowed with the polished sheen of hardened steel, transforming it into a battering ram of immense power. It was a classic pincer movement, a champion's strategy executed with perfect timing. The two powerful attacks converged on the corrupted Metagross. The impact was cataclysmic. A shockwave of force erupted from the point of contact, shaking the very foundations of the laboratory. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. For a moment, the Metagross was completely engulfed in the raw power of two of the strongest Pokémon of their respective types. But when the dust settled, the sight was chilling. Garchomp and Steelix were thrown back, skidding across the metal floor. The Metagross hovered in the same spot, its metallic hide scarred and dented, but the pulsating purple conduits that snaked across its body were already glowing brighter, sealing the wounds with a sickly, ethereal light. It hadn't just endured the attack, it was regenerating from it at an impossible rate. Your methods are archaic. Champion, Lyra stated, tapping a command into a holographic panel that shimmered into existence on her wrist. You seek to overpower. We seek to transcend. Observe. The Metagross's single, malevolent red eye fixed on Garchomp. One of its massive, clawed arms detached, reshaping itself in midair into a blade of solidified purple energy. It lashed out with impossible speed, not with a physical strike, but with a psychic one. A wave of pure, distorted force, a psychic-type move twisted and amplified by the portal's energy, slammed into Garchomp. Cynthia's ace cried out, not just in pain, but in confusion, stumbling back as if its very mind had been assaulted. It's using a move I've never seen before, Cynthia said, her voice tight with disbelief, her strategic mind racing to analyze the new variable. The energy is psychically corrosive. While the champions fought, Jasmine stood frozen, her hands pressed to her chest. Her empathy was a wide-open channel, and the feedback from the corrupted Metagross was a torrent of agony. But through the pain, she was beginning to perceive something else. A pattern in the chaos. Naruto had not moved. He stood as a silent observer, his sapphire eyes not on the physical battle, but on the flow of energy within the room. He watched the purple light pulse from the pylons, into the Metagross, and then manifest as corrupted power. He saw how it healed the creature, how it fueled its unnatural attacks. This wasn't a Pokémon. It was a puppet, a weaponized terminal for the dimensional gate itself. Attacking. The puppet was futile as long as the strings were attached. Jasmine, he said, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. What do you feel? Jasmine flinched, startled by his directness. She struggled to find the words. It's broken, she stammered, her eyes wide with a pained understanding. A Metagross has 4 brains, all linked, working in perfect harmony. It's a supercomputer. But this one, the brains are fighting. The energy, it's driving them insane. They are not one mind, but 4 separate, screaming consciousnesses trapped in one body. It has no strategy. It has no intellect. It is just a wound. That was it. The key. Naruto's eyes narrowed in understanding. A compass spinning wildly. You couldn't fix it by hitting it harder. You had to remove the magnetic interference. Cynthia, he called out, his voice ringing with newfound command. Keep it occupied. Don't try to injure it, just draw its attention. Jasmine, have Steelix create a wall between us and it. Buy me time. Cynthia didn't question him. She had seen him do the impossible twice now. She trusted his insight. Garchomp, use Sandstorm. Obscure its vision. Her Garchomp roared and whipped its tail, summoning a swirling vortex of sand and grit that filled the area around the Metagross, hampering its sight and movement. Steelix, Stone Edge, Jasmine commanded. Her partner slammed its tail into the floor, and massive pillars of rock erupted, forming a rugged, temporary barricade that gave Naruto a precious few moments of cover. Behind the wall of stone, Naruto closed his eyes. He ignored the sounds of battle, the screeching of the Metagross, and the clinical, amused commentary from Lyra. He reached inward, to the core of his power, the silent, ancient energy of the Dragon Sage. He was not a ninja here. He was not a Jinchuriki. He was a force of balance in a world thrown into chaos. He held his hands out, palms facing the swirling portal. He was not going to attack it. He was going to speak to the space it occupied. He let the draconic tongue flow from him, not as a shouted command, but as an undeniable, fundamental truth whispered into the fabric of reality. He spoke a word that did not exist in human language. It was a concept, a law. It was the idea of severance. Ketsubutsu. The effect was not explosive. It was absolute. A shimmering, almost invisible wall of emerald energy materialized in the air, a perfect hemispherical dome that encapsulated the portal and its 3 stabilizing pylons. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the pulsating purple conduit snocking across the floor from the pylons to the Metagross flickered violently, like dying lightbulbs. The corrupted Metagross, which had just shattered the stone pillars with a concussive blast, suddenly froze midair. It let out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek as its connection to the portal was forcibly cut. The regenerating energy ceased. The purple glow in its veins sputtered. The unnatural power that had made it a transcendent monster was gone. It was just a broken, tortured creature, its technological enhancements now dead weight. Lyra's cold, scientific demeanor finally shattered. A look of pure, unadulterated shock flashed across her face. What? Impossible. The energy flow is absolute. You cannot simply erect a barrier. What have you done? I have reminded your machine that it is a guest in this world, Naruto said. His eyes snapping open, glowing with a faint, emerald light. And it has overstayed its welcome. The Metagross, now vulnerable, its psychic defenses in disarray, Cr. Ashed to the floor with a screech of grinding metal. Cynthia, now, Naruto roared. There was no hesitation. Garchomp, finish this. Draco Meteor. Cynthia's Garchomp soared into the air, its body glowing with an immense, golden power. It opened its maw and unleashed a brilliant, star-like orb of draconic energy that shot towards the ceiling of the chamber. At its apex, the orb exploded, raining down a devastating shower of smaller, targeted meteors. The broken Metagross had no defense. The meteors slammed into its body, each impact a definitive, percussive blast of pure, natural power. The erupted Pokémon convulsed one last time and then collapsed, silent and still, its malevolent red eye fading to black. Silence reigned once more, broken only by the panting of the victorious Pokémon and the faint, now contained hum of the portal behind Naruto's barrier. Lyra stared at the scene, her shock quickly morphing into something else, a manic, feverish excitement. Incredible, she whispered, her amethyst eyes wide with scientific rapture. You didn't overpower the energy. You isolated it. You imposed a different set of physical laws upon a localized area. The data from this counter alone is worth more than the entire island. She looked not like a defeated commander, but like a researcher who had just made the discovery of a lifetime. "It's over, Lyra," Cynthia said, her Garchomp moving to stand protectively in front of her. "Surrender." Lyra laughed, a sharp, cold sound that held no humor. "Surrender. Champion, this was never a battle. This was a diagnostic, an experiment to gauge the capabilities of our primary target." She pointed a finger at Naruto. "And the results are beyond our wildest projections." She tapped her wrist console again. A high-pitched alarm began to blare throughout the facility. A synthesized voice echoed through the chamber. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Detonation in 5 minutes. This facility has served its purpose," Lyra said, her composure completely restored. "Its loss is acceptable. We have what we came for." She turned and, without a shred of fear or hesitation, began walking towards the shimmering portal, right up to the edge of Naruto's emerald barrier. "My master will be so very pleased to learn of this new variable in the equation," she said, placing a hand against the barrier. It sizzled at her touch, but did not break. "He is building a new world. A world of perfect logic and order, free from the chaotic, unpredictable whims of spirit. A world where you, Dragon Sage, will be the ultimate power source. We will meet again." With a final, chillingly serene smile, she took a step back and then fell backward, allowing herself to be swallowed by the swirling vortex of the portal. Her body dissolved into the purple and black energy, vanishing without a trace. The moment she was gone, Naruto's barrier shattered like glass. The portal itself, its stabilizer pylons now overloading without Lyra's control, began to collapse in on itself, sucking in air and light with a deafening roar before imploding into nothingness, leaving behind only a scorch mark on the floor and an eerie silence. "Detonation in 4 minutes. We have to go now," Cynthia shouted, already returning her Garchomp and moving towards the sealed exit. Jasmine returned her exhausted Steelix, her face pale but resolute. They ran to the door, which was sealed tight. "It won't budge," Cynthia yelled, pulling at the seamless metal. Naruto didn't waste a second. He placed both hands on the door, channeling his power not with a word, but with a raw, focused intent. The draconic energy flowed into the metal, not to destroy it, but to find its resonant frequency, its structural weaknesses. "Stand back," he ordered. He pushed. The thick, reinforced metal door did not explode. It simply crumbled, dissolving into a cascade of metallic sand, revealing the dark, decaying tunnels of the processing plant beyond. Detonation in 3 minutes. The race was on. They sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors they had so carefully navigated before, the ground now shaking with the prelude to the facility's destruction. The race against time had begun. A desperate flight from the heart of the Screaming Stone. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Embers of Ideology. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shrieking metal and groaning earth. The clinical red of the emergency lights was replaced by the chaotic strobing of sparking conduits and the primal, hungry orange of explosions ripping through the facility's lower levels. The very air, superheated and thick with the dust of pulverized concrete, was a physical weight, pressing in on them, trying to choke them. Naruto, Cynthia, and Jasmine were no longer a team of specialists, they were survivors. Their flight a desperate, instinct-driven sprint through the guts of a dying metal beast. Detonation in 2 minutes. The synthesized voice was distorted now, warped by the failing power grid. A death rattle that echoed through the collapsing corridors. "This way." Cynthia's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the din. Her mind, a repository of maps and schematics, had Ulrea. Dai calculated the fastest route to the surface. She moved with the focused grace of a predator, her long coat billowing behind her as she vaulted over a buckled floor plate. The main ventilation shaft should be 50 meters ahead. Its our most direct path. A section of the ceiling ahead of them groaned, a deep, guttural sound of tortured steel, and then collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of girders and rock. Their path was gone, buried under tons of rubble. "Plan B?" Naruto asked, his voice unnervingly calm as he skidded to a halt, shielding Jasmine from the worst of the dust cloud. Before Cynthia could answer, Jasmine cried out, her eyes wide. To the left, now. There was no time to ask why. They obeyed her instinctual command, diving into a narrow maintenance corridor just as the wall they had been standing beside was obliterated by an eruption of superheated steam from a ruptured pipe. The blast would have boiled them alive. The pressure is building in the geothermal pipes, Jasmine explained. Her hand pressed against the vibrating wall, her empathy no longer a receiver for pain but a finely tuned seismic sensor. I can feel the ruptures before they happen. The structure is screaming. They were a symphony of coordinated survival. Cynthia provided the grand strategy, the map of the maze. Jasmine provided the tactical, moment-to-moment instinct, the whispers of the dying labyrinth. And Naruto was the force of nature that made it all possible. When a reinforced blast door, jammed shut by the buckling frame, blocked their path, he didn't bother with the lock. He slammed a palm against it, and a ripple of draconic energy turned the hardened steel as brittle as sun-baked clay, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. When a chasm opened in the floor before them, he stomped his foot. And a bridge of solid, compressed earth rose to meet them. He was not just clearing a path, he was rewriting the terrain of their escape. Detonation in 1 minute. They final. Y burst into the cavernous chamber housing the main ventilation shaft. It was a colossal cylinder of steel that rose hundreds of feet into the darkness, its sides lined with a rusted service ladder. The explosions had already reached the base. The supports were buckling, and the entire structure was groaning, beginning to tilt at a precarious angle. There's no time to climb, Cynthia yelled, assessing the impossible situation in a fraction of a second. The ground beneath them heaved, a violent, final convulsion. This was it, the main charge. Hold on to me, Naruto commanded, his voice an unbreakable anchor in the chaos. He wrapped an arm around each woman, pulling them in tight against him. He took a single, deep breath, and his legs coiled, not with the power of muscle, but with the explosive energy of raw, condensed chakra. The ground beneath his feet cracked and spider-webbed. With a sound like a thunderclap, he launched them upwards. They shot up the ventilation shaft like a human cannonball. The rushing whined a roaring tempest in their ears. They passed ladder rungs and service platforms in a dizzying blur. For a heart-stopping moment, Naruto saw the circle of gray, overcast sky that marked the exit. A distant promise of safety. Below them, the world turned white. The final detonation occurred, a silent, blinding flash of light that consumed the entire facility. Then came the shockwave. It tore up the shaft, a concussive, unstoppable force. It caught them midair, a giant's hand that swatted them out of the sky. They were thrown, tumbling through the air, out of vent and across the iron grit soil of the island's surface. They hit the ground hard, rolling, the impact stealing the breath from their lungs. Naruto, with the last of his conscious effort, twisted his body to absorb the worst of the landing for the two women he held. He lay there, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the ground where the processing plant had once stood collapsing in on itself, a massive, swirling sinkhole that swallowed the embers of Team Galactic's ambition, dragging the screaming stone down into a final, silent grave. Consciousness returned slowly, not to the shriek of alarms, but to the gentle lapping of waves and the distant cry of a winggull. The air tasted of salt and rain, clean and fresh. The oppressive, old grinding hum that had defined the island was gone. Utterly and completely gone. The silence it left behind was the most beautiful sound Naruto had ever heard. He opened his eyes. He was lying on the black sand of the shoreline. A folded coat, Cynthia's, was tucked beneath his head as a makeshift pillow. A cool, damp cloth rested on his forehead. Jasmine was sitting beside him, wringing out another cloth in a tide pool. The frantic terror was gone from her eyes, replaced by a profound, soul-deep exhaustion and a quiet, shimmering relief. At her side, her steelix lay coiled, its massive body still and calm. Its red eyes no longer feverish, but watching the horizon with a placid contentment. The island was at peace, and so was its most sensitive inhabitant. "He's awake," Jasmine said, her voice soft. Cynthia strode over from the edge of the water, her Pokédex in hand. Her usual immaculate appearance was gone. Her blonde hair was mussed and damp, her face smudged with soot, and her practical black pants were torn at the knee. She had never looked more alive. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone a mixture of clinical concern and genuine warmth. "Like I jumped up a chimney and got hit by a building," Naruto rasped, pushing himself into a sitting position. His body ached, a deep, cellular exhaustion from the massive expenditure of energy, but nothing was broken. A fairly accurate assessment, Cynthia conceded. A small smile touching her lips. The entire facility is gone. It collapsed into a subterranean cavern. The island's magnetic field is already stabilizing. It's over. Jasmine came over, kneeling beside him. She reached out and, with a hesitation born of her natural shyness, placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you, Naruto," she said, her hazel eyes meeting his. There was a world of meaning in those two simple words. It was not just thanks for the rescue, but for the relief, for silencing the pain that had been her constant companion since she'd arrived. "You gave this land its voice back." Naruto looked from her earnest, empathetic face to the vast, quiet landscape. The wild Pokémon were beginning to emerge from their hiding places, Aaron, Lyron, even. A few hardy Geodude, moving not with pained frenzy, but with a cautious curiosity. He could feel the change, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the earth reasserting itself, a song of healing. He had not just destroyed a threat. He had performed a restoration. "I only created an opening," he said quietly. "The island is healing itself." The journey back to Sunnysshore was a world away from the tense, oppressive voyage to the island. The sea was calm, the sky was clearing, and the oppressive hum was a fading memory. The grizzled boat captain took one look at their ragged, soot-stained appearances and a wisdom acquired over a lifetime at sea, simply nodded and set his course, no questions asked. They patched a call through to Volkner from Cynthia's Pokédex. His face appeared on the small screen. Looking just as tired but twice as wired as they were. His lab was a mess of holographic displays behind him, all showing swirling lines of data. "I tracked the whole thing," he said, his voice buzzing with intellectual fervor. The energy signature of the facility vanished in a quantum detonation that was, well, spectacular, is the only word for it. The extra-dimensional signature of the portal imploded moments before. It's gone. Clean. Whatever you did it thoroughly. But that's not the interesting part. There's an interesting part beyond a secret base self-destructing. Cynthia asked dryly. "Always." Volkner grinned, his eyes gleaming. "Lyra, the commander. Just before the portal collapsed, she piggybacked a data packet onto my sensor probe. A burst transmission. It was elegant, heavily encrypted, but, I'm better. Quote, she sent you a message?" Jasmine asked, confused. "Why?" "Professional courtesy." Volkner shrugged. "Or maybe the triumphant boasting of a scientist who believes she has already won. She sent me this." The image on the Pokédex screen changed. It was a star chart, elegant and complex. But the constellations were alien, twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Cynthia leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing. I recognize those formations. But they're not right. They're distorted." Her mind, a vast library of historical and archaeological data, was making connections at lightning speed. "Volkner, can you cross-reference this with the stellar cartography archives from the Celestic Town Historical Research Society?" "Already on it," Volkner said, his fingers flying across a keyboard out of sight. "The patterns are a 98.7% match for the oldest star maps ever discovered in Sinnoh. The ones painted on the walls of the Celestic ruins. Maps that supposedly date back to a time before the creation of Spear Pillar, before everything." A heavy silence fell over the small cabin of the boat. The implications of Volkner's words were staggering. "What does it mean?" Jasmine asked, her voice a whisper. "It means that wherever Lyra and her master are, it's not just another dimension in the sense of a parallel space," Cynthia explained, her voice grave. "It's a place linked to our world's most ancient, primordial past. They're not just trying to bring a new world here. They are trying to resurrect a dead one." She looked at Naruto. Lyra's words, a world free from spirit. The ancient myths speak of a time before Dialga and Palkia, before time and space were given form, when the world was a chaotic, empty place ruled by a shadow. Naruto listened, his expression grim. An empty world, a power based on a void, a master who resided in a place of primordial history. It was all starting to form a terrifying, coherent picture. "This void energy they use," Naruto said, his voice low and contemplative. "It is the antithesis of everything I know. My power, the power of my world, comes from life. From the spirit, from the connection between beings. Theirs comes from nothingness. It consumes, it corrupts, it creates prisons. He thought of the metagross, of the four warring minds trapped in a shell of technology. They see you as the ultimate battery, Cynthia concluded, understanding dawning in her eyes. A being of pure, self-sustaining life and spiritual energy. You are the engine they need to power their world of nothing. The star chart on the screen reappeared. At its very center, where a pole star should have been, was a single symbol. It was the spiraling galaxy of the old Team Galactic emblem, but it was different now. The core of the galaxy was not a star. It was a black, empty hole, an icon of utter consumption. Celestic Town, Cynthia said, her voice filled with a new, steely resolve. The answers are there, in the ruins, in the history of this region's creation. That's where we go next. The boat sailed on, leaving the now peaceful Iron Island in its wake. They had won the battle, but the scope of the war had just expanded to an astronomical scale. It was a war of ideologies, of spirit versus void, of life versus nothingness. And at the heart of it all was a man who was not of this world, and the two women who had, for reasons of their own, chosen to stand by his side. Cynthia, the seeker of knowledge, saw in him the key to a puzzle that spanned history itself. Jasmine, the vessel of empathy, saw in him a guardian of the life she so cherished. The embers of a terrifying ideology had been uncovered, but in the small cabin of a fishing boat, a new, powerful alliance was being forged in the fires of shared purpose and growing admiration. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Echoes in the Stone. The journey inland was a slow, deliberate ascent from the world of tomorrow to the world of yesterday. The sleek, solar-powered efficiency of Sunnyshore's city gave way to the rugged, industrial charm of Orberg, and then that too was left behind. They traded asphalt for packed earth, the hum of technology for the whisper of wind through pines. The mountains of the Coronet Range loomed, great, gray sentinels piercing a sky that seemed impossibly vast and clean. The air thinned, growing crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp moss, ancient stone, and the sharp, clean fragrance of snow from the highest, unreachable peaks. Their destination, Celestic Town, was not so much a town as a secret, nestled in a caldera-like valley at the heart of the mountains. It was a place that time had respectfully chosen to walk around rather than through. The buildings were made of dark, weathered wood and gray river stone. Their roofs gently sloped and covered in a living carpet of green moss. A single, crystal-clear stream bisected the valley, its gentle murmur the town's only constant sound. There were no paved roads, only well-worn footpaths. The air was filled with a profound and unshakable peace, a spiritual resonance that settled over Naruto like a familiar cloak. This was a place of power, but unlike the chaotic, corrupted power of Iron Island or the contained, artificial power of Sunnyshore, this was the quiet, immense power of history, of belief, of a world in perfect, natural balance. As they walked towards the center of the small settlement, they drew quiet, curious stares from the few residents they passed. These were people whose faces were lined not with the stress of modern life, but with the wisdom of seasons. Their movements slow and deliberate. Their goal was the town's single, most prominent feature, a small, elegant shrine that stood at the entrance to a cave system at the valley's northern edge. It was this cave, Cynthia had explained, that housed the most ancient murals, the ones depicting Sinnoh's creation myth. But their path was blocked. Standing before the simple Den Torii gate of the shrine was a young woman. She was their age, but she carried herself with an ancient, unyielding stillness. Her long, raven black hair was tied back with a simple white ribbon, and her eyes were the color of twilight. A deep, smoky indigo that seemed to hold the secrets of the stars. She wore the simple, elegant robes of a shrine maiden, a white kosode over flowing red hakama. She held a wooden staff, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of her office. Her beauty was not the glamorous, confident beauty of Cynthia, nor the gentle, unassuming beauty of Jasmine. It was a stark, severe beauty, as elegant and unforgiving as the mountains that surrounded her. The shrine is closed to visitors, she said, her voice as calm and clear as the mountain stream, but with an undercurrent of unyielding granite. She did not raise her voice, yet the words were a definitive barrier. Her gaze swept over them, lingering on Cynthia's high-tech Pokédex with a flicker of disapproval before settling on Naruto. In her eyes, he was not an enigma or a source of power. He was simply an outsider. A disruption. "We are not simply visitors," Cynthia said, stepping forward, her tone polite but firm. "I am Cynthia, the Sinnoh League champion. We are here on official league business. It concerns the safety of the entire region." The Shrine Maiden's expression did not change. "The safety of the region has been entrusted to the champion and her Pokémon for generations. The safety of this sacred place has been entrusted to my family. The two are not the same. Your technology, your battles, they have no place here. This is a place of listening, not of shouting. My name is Alara," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I am the guardian of these ruins. You may be the champion, but here, our authority ends where this consecrated ground begins." It was an impasse. Cynthia's authority, which opened any door in the region, meant nothing here. Jasmine, sensing the woman's deep-seated, almost fierce connection to the land, remained respectfully silent. Naruto stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not challenge Alara. He did not try to assert his own power. He simply looked at the ancient stones of the shrine, at the moss clinging to the Torii gate, at the very air that seemed to shimmer with history. "You are right," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of any challenge. His words surprised both Cynthia and Jasmine. Alara's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. "This is a place of listening. And the stones are afraid." Alara's composure finally cracked. A flicker of shock, of disbelief, crossed her features. "What did you say?" "The energy you protect, the spirit of this place, it has an echo," Naruto continued, his sapphire eyes seeming to look past the fizz. "Ikal world and into the spiritual resonance beneath it. And that echo is being threatened by silence. A nothingness. The same nothingness that poisoned Iron Island. You have felt it, haven't you? A cold spot in the warmth. A wrongness in the rhythm of the seasons." He was giving voice to a fear she had held in her heart for months, a subtle disharmony she had felt in her daily meditations but had been unable to name. She had dismissed it as her own anxiety, a failure in her own focus. But this outsider, this strange man in tattered clothes, had walked into her valley and named her deepest fear with an impossible certainty. "Who are you?" Alara asked, her voice losing its granite edge, replaced by a soft, trembling uncertainty. "I am a sage," Naruto answered simply. "My world is gone, the language of the earth is the same everywhere. Your shrine is not just a collection of old rocks and paintings. It is an anchor, a focal point of this world's spiritual energy. And Team Galactic wants to cut the rope." He met her gaze, and for the first time, she did not see an outsider. She saw a fellow guardian, a being who understood the world not as a thing to be conquered or studied, but as a living entity to be protected. She was silent for a long moment, her twilight eyes searching his. Then, she gave a slow, deep bow. "Forgive my impertinence, sage," she said, her voice now filled with a deep, profound respect. "Please, follow me. What you need to know, it is inside." She turned and led them through the Torii gate, into the cool, silent darkness of the cave. The air inside was still and cold, smelling of damp earth and something else, a scent like ozone and starlight, the lingering perfume of creation itself. Cynthia looked at Naruto, a thousand questions in her eyes. He had once again bypassed her logic, her authority, her science, and reached the heart of the matter with an intuitive leap that defied explanation. She found the experience both incredibly frustrating and deeply, undeniably attractive. He was a constant, walking challenge to her entire worldview, and she was beginning to relish it. Jasmine, meanwhile, felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The spiritual resonance of the cave was a soothing balm, the polar opposite of Iron Island's agony. She watched Naruto as he walked, his presence in perfect harmony with the ancient place. He did not feel like an intruder here. He felt like he belonged, a kindred spirit to the silent, watchful stones. Her admiration for him was growing, deepening from gratitude into something warmer, something more personal. The cave opened into a vast, circular chamber. The walls were a breathtaking canvas of murals, painted in ochre, charcoal, and a faint, shimmering pigment that seemed to capture and hold the dim torchlight. At the center of it all was a massive, iconic mural. It depicted two colossal, draconic beings, one shimmering with the light of diamonds, the other glowing with the luster of pearls. Dialga and Palkia, time and space. This is the story of our creation, Alara said, her voice soft with reverence. The story of the two who shaped the world from chaos. Cynthia immediately moved closer, her Pokédex already scanning, cataloging, comparing. The art style is consistent with the late pre-Sinnoh period, she murmured, lost in her academic analysis. The pigment, it's crushed grog. Cydia flower mixed with powdered meteor dust. Astonishing. But Naruto was looking at something else. At the edges of the grand mural, in the background, almost hidden in the depiction of the primordial chaos, was a third entity. It was not as clearly defined as the other two. It was a shadowy, serpentine creature of immense size, with ghostly appendages and a single, malevolent red eye. It was not a creator. It was an uncreator. A being of anti-creation. There were three, Naruto said, his voice drawing everyone's attention. He pointed to the shadowy figure. Alara nodded grimly. He who should not be named. The ancient texts call it the antithesis. The renewer. While the two brothers built, it would follow behind, unmaking their work, returning reality to the perfect, logical, senseless void from which it came. It was not evil. It was simply, its nature. A force of absolute balance. Giratina, Cynthia breathed, her eyes wide. The legends always portrayed it as a violent, rebellious outcast, banished to the distortion world for its destructive nature. But this mural suggests something more fundamental. Not a rebel, but an opposing, necessary force. The two brothers could not destroy it, Alara continued, her voice a near whisper. To do so would be to unbalance their own existence. So instead, they wove a prison. A world that was a reflection of this one, a place of different physics and broken logic, where it could exist without unmaking reality. The distortion world. They sealed the gates, and with the help of the lake guardians, the beings of spirit, of emotion, of knowledge, they erased the memory of the antithesis from the world, leaving only the story of the two creators. They feared that to even remember the void was to invite it back. Naruto stared at the shadowy depiction of Giratina, a creature of absolute void, a master residing in a place linked to primordial history. Lyra's words now made a chilling, perfect sense. Team Galactic, Naruto said, his voice low. Their master isn't trying to control Giratina. He is Giratina, or he's its servant. He's not in the distortion world. He's in that primordial reality. And he's using its power to get out. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a physical blow. The extra-dimensional energy. The star mapped to a time before creation. The ideology of a world without spirit. It was the philosophy of the void. The star chart Lyra sent me, Cynthia said, her mind racing. It wasn't a map of their location. It was a key, a cosmological alignment, a moment when the walls between the worlds are at their thinnest. A moment when a gate can be opened not to the distortion world, but to the primordial chaos behind it. And when is this alignment? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling. Cynthia projected the star chart from her Pokédex. Alara looked at it, and her blood ran cold. The festival of the passing moon, she whispered, her face pale. It is an ancient celestic tradition. A night of celebration that marks the moment the moon passes behind the peak of Mount Coronet, from the perspective of Spear Pillar. It is a time of immense spiritual energy. A time when the veil between the worlds is said to be thin enough to hear the whispers of the gods. She looked at them, her twilight eyes filled with a dawning horror. It is in 3 days. 3 days. They had 3 days to stop an ancient, primordial force of nothingness from being unleashed upon their world. Their enemy was not a simple criminal organization anymore. It was a cosmic horror, armed with an ideology that was the antithesis of life itself. Spear Pillar, Naruto stated, his voice ringing with a cold, hard finality. That is where they will be. That is where we must go. Alara looked at Naruto, at the sheer, unshakable certainty in his eyes. He had come to her town as a stranger, and in the span of an hour, had uncovered a truth that her family had guarded for millennia. He was not just a sage. He was a harbinger, a warrior destined to stand against the coming silence. You cannot go alone, she said, her voice regaining its strength. She walked to a small alcove in the cave wall and returned with a simple, unadorned clay flute. This is the azure flute. The legends say that its song can soothe the rage of the gods, that it plays a note that resonates with the very pillars of creation. She held it out to Naruto. I do not know if the legends are true. But the spirit of this place, the very stones of this mountain, they are telling me that it belongs with you now. Naruto took the flute. It was cool to the touch. And it seemed to hum with a faint, almost inaudible energy, a note of pure, perfect harmony. It was a key, a tool, a prayer made manifest. They had their answer. They had their destination. And they had their deadline. As they left the silent, sacred cave and stepped back into the crisp mountain air, the world seemed different. The peace of Celestic Town was no longer just a tranquil atmosphere. It was a precious, fragile thing, a single flickering candle against a vast, encroaching darkness. And they were the ones who had to keep it from being extinguished. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Mountain's Breath. The world had narrowed to the path ahead. The ascent of Mount Coronet was not a journey of miles, but of layers. They climbed through geological time, Saint strata of rock that told stories older than any human myth. They ascended through ecosystems, from the thick, fragrant pine forests at the base, where the air was alive with the chittering of starly and bidoof, to the windswept alpine meadows where hardy snowrunt huddled amongst lichen-covered boulders, and finally, into the harsh, unforgiving domain of rock, ice, and sky. The air grew thin and sharp, each breath a conscious effort. A sip of crystalline cold that burned in the lungs. The silence was a presence, a deep, resonant quiet broken only by the crunch of their boots on the gravelly path. The mournful sigh of the wind whipping through jagged rock formations, and the rhythmic, labored sound of their own breathing. It was a world stripped bare, a place of stark, brutal beauty that demanded respect. Their small group had settled into a natural rhythm born of necessity. Alara, the shrine maiden, was their undisputed guide. She moved with a light, certain step, her simple sandals seeming to find purchase on treacherous surfaces where the rugged boots of the others slipped. She read the mountain not as a map, but as a living text, pointing out paths invisible to the untrained eye. Identifying the subtle shifts in the wind that foretold a change in weather, her connection to the ancient spirit of the place an unerring compass. Cynthia, ever the scholar, had put her Pokédex away. Its advanced sensors were useless here. The mountain's own immense, chaotic magnetic and spiritual energies scrambled its delicate instruments, rendering it little more than a fancy paperweight. Stripped of her technology, she relied on her own formidable resilience and intellect, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the terrain, analyzing rock formations, committing the path to her photographic memory. A quiet, fierce determination had settled over her, a refusal to be bested by this raw, untamable force of nature. Jasmine was a silent barometer of the mountain's mood. Her empathy, which had been a source of torment on Iron Island, was now a different kind of burden. She felt the sheer, overwhelming life force of the mountain, not the pain of corruption, but the ancient, slumbering consciousness of a billion stones. The patient, unblinking awareness of a peak that had watched the stars turn for millennia. It was a constant, immense pressure on her psyche, and she walked with a deep, meditative focus. Her hands often resting on the heavy ball at her waist, drawing comfort from the familiar, solid presence of her steelix. And Naruto was their center of gravity. The thin air did not seem to trouble him. His chakra-honed body accustomed to far greater physical extremes. He walked with an easy, untiring grace, a silent sentinel who seemed to draw strength from the very air that weakened the others. He was their rearguard, his senses a constant, vigilant net, watching their back trail, feeling for any disturbances in the natural energy that might signal a threat. He was the anchor that kept their small expedition from being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of their environment. The wind is changing, Alara said, her voice barely rising above the gale, yet carrying to each of them with perfect clarity. She stopped, her hand resting on a tall, slender standing stone that seemed to hum with a faint energy. It no longer speaks of passage. It speaks of fury. A storm is coming. A bad one. We must find shelter. As if on cue, the sky, which had been a hard, metallic gray, began to darken to a bruised, violet black. The wind, which had been a mournful sigh, began to howl, a hungry, predatory sound that clawed at their clothes and stung their exposed skin with particles of ice. Snow, thick and wet, began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal sheet. The world vanished, reduced to a swirling vortex of white and gray. This way, Alara shouted, pointing towards a dark, looming shadow of rock to their right. There are caves. The ancestors used them for shelter during their pilgrimages. They staggered through the burgeoning blizzard, the ground now treacherous with a layer of slick, new-fallen snow. The temperature plummeted. It was Cynthia who slipped first, her boot finding a patch of black ice hidden beneath the snow. She cried out as her ankle twisted, and she went down hard. Before anyone else could react, Naruto was there. He moved with a speed that defied the conditions, appearing at her side in a blur. He scooped her up into his arms with an effortless strength that belied his lean frame. "My ankle," she gasped, the pain sharp and immediate. "Don't worry about it now," he said, his voice a warm, reassuring rumble against the storm's fury. He held her securely, his body a shield against the worst of the wind. Cynthia, the indomitable champion, found herself held, protected, and for a moment, all she could do was cling to the solid, steady warmth of him, the scent of ozone and clean mountain air that seemed to surround him. They reached the cave just as the storm unleashed its full, unrestrained power. It was a shallow opening, a dark slash in the rock face, but it was enough. They stumbled inside, out of the wind's immediate grasp, into a space of profound, echoing silence and absolute darkness. Jasmine collapsed against the wall, shivering, her face pale with exhaustion and the psychic strain of the mountain's roaring energy. Alara leaned on her staff, her breathing deep and even, but the cold had clearly taken its toll on her as well. Naruto gently set Cynthia down, his movements careful and precise. He knelt before her, his hands hovering over her injured ankle. "May I?" he asked, his gaze meeting hers. She nodded, a faint blush on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. His touch was surprisingly gentle. A soft, emerald light, the familiar glow of his healing art, enveloped her ankle. The sharp, biting pain subsided, replaced by a deep, soothing warmth that spread up her leg, easing the ache in her overtaxed muscles. "The bone isn't broken, but the ligaments are badly strained," he said, his voice a low, clinical assessment that she, a woman of science, could appreciate. "This will stabilize it, but you need to stay off it for a while." He then turned his attention to the others. He moved to the center of the small cave, placed his palms on the cold stone floor, and closed his eyes. He spoke a single, resonant word in the Draconic tongue. "Hearth." A wave of gentle, pervasive warmth radiated out from him, pushing back the biting chill of the cave. The dampness in the air evaporated. The shivering in Jasmine's frame subsided. It was not the heat of a fire. It was a deeper, more fundamental warmth, as if the stone itself had decided to awaken and share its latent, geothermal energy. Then, for light, he held up a hand. A small, perfect sphere of golden light, a miniature sun, coalesced in his palm, casting the cave in a soft, welcoming glow. It pulsed with a steady, gentle rhythm, bathing their tired faces in its light. The three women stared at him. He had not just brought them to shelter. He was the shelter. He was warmth. He was light. He was safety. In this harsh, unforgiving world, he was a bastion of life and comfort. "How?" Cynthia whispered, looking from her now painless ankle to the glowing orb in his hand. "Your power, it seems to have no limits." "Every power has limits," Naruto replied, his expression serious as he looked at the miniature sun in his hand. "Mine comes from life energy. From the connections between things. Right now, this mountain is overflowing with it. I am simply borrowing it, giving it shape." He looked at Alara. "This mountain is more alive than any place I have ever been." Alara nodded, her twilight eyes filled with a deep, reverent awe. "The sages of my people taught that Mount Coronet is not a place, but a presence. It is the heart of Sinnoh. It remembers everything. It breathes. You are speaking its language, Sage Naruto." A comfortable silence settled over them, the only sound the distant, muffled howl of the blizzard outside their sanctuary. They were a small, strange collection of souls, huddled together in the heart of a myth. A champion of science, a maiden of faith, an empath of steel, and a sage from a fallen world. "This feels familiar," Naruto said quietly, his gaze distant as he stared into the glowing light. "The cave?" Jasmine asked softly. "No," he shook his head. "This, being trapped, the storm outside, the quiet within." His expression was shadowed by a memory, a ghost of a past they could not see. "My master," He and I were once pinned down by a blizzard like this for 3 days, during a mission in the land of snow. We had nothing but a single ration bar and the clothes on our backs. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He spent the entire time complaining about his research being delayed and trying to teach me the principles of fuinjutsu by drawing diagrams on the cave wall with a burnt stick. It was the most he had ever shared about his past. A small, intimate detail that suddenly made him more real, more vulnerable. They saw not just the godlike sage, but the student, the boy who had a master. A life, a home. Cynthia found herself wanting to know more, to understand the world that had forged such a man. He sounds interesting, she said, her voice gentle. He was a perverted, infuriating, brilliant old fool, Naruto said, the words a mixture of profound affection and deep, unresolved grief. And he was the closest thing to a father I ever had. He paused. He died in the war. They all did. Quote. The simple, unadorned statement hung in the warm air of the cave. The weight of his loss, of his solitude, was suddenly a palpable thing. Jasmine, guided by her unwavering empathy, moved closer to him. She didn't say anything. She simply sat beside him and gently, hesitantly, placed her hand on his, a silent gesture of shared sorrow, of comfort, of presence. He didn't pull away. His hand, calloused and strong, remained still beneath hers. Alara watched them, her expression unreadable. To be the last, she said, her voice a soft, meditative hum, is a terrible burden. But it is also a sacred duty. You carry the memories of your people. You are a living shrine. Their spirits walk with you. A shrine of ghosts, Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper. No, Alara countered, her twilight eyes intense. A library of souls. And a library is meant to be shared. You honor them not by mourning their silence, but by speaking their truths. Cynthia listened, her analytical mind grappling with concepts that defied data and logic. Spirit, souls, sacred duties. Alara spoke of the world as a poem. Cynthia had always seen it as a textbook. But here, in this cave, warmed by a power that was both miraculous and real, the poem was starting to make more sense than the textbook. Your science is a language for describing the world, champion, Alara said, as if reading her thoughts. My faith is a language for listening to it. They are not opposites. They are two different ways of reading the same book. Cynthia looked at Naruto, at the man who healed with the light of life. Who commanded the earth with a word, who held a star in his hand. He was the book, written in a language none of them could fully comprehend, yet they were all, in their own ways, learning to read him. They rested for hours, the storm raging outside while a fragile, powerful intimacy grew within the small cave. They shared what little food they had, energy bars from Cynthia, dried berries from Alara. Naruto melted snow for them to drink using the heat from his hand. They spoke of their homes, of their dreams, of the lives they had led before this strange convergence of fate. Cynthia spoke of her love for history, of the thrill of unearthing a forgotten relic and piecing together the story of the past. Jasmine spoke of the quiet joy she found in her Pokémon, of the silent, perfect understanding that existed between her and her Steelix. Alara spoke of the immense, humbling weight of her duty, of the quiet pride she felt in protecting a tradition that stretched back into the mists of time. And Naruto listened. He spoke little of his own world, but he listened with an intensity, an empathy, that made each of them feel truly seen, truly heard. He was a warrior, a sage, a powerhouse of unimaginable strength, but in that cave, he was also just a man, a lonely soul who had found a fleeting moment of connection in the heart of a storm. As the hours passed, the howl of the wind began to subside. The oppressive darkness outside the cave began to soften into a gentle, pre-dawn gray. The storm was passing. Naruto finally let the sphere of light in his hand dissipate, its warmth lingering in the air. He stood up, his movements fluid and certain once more. He walked to the mouth of the cave. The world was transformed. The blizzard had scoured the landscape, leaving behind a pristine, untouched blanket of white. The snow glittered under the light of 1,000 stars, now visible in the clearing sky. And in the east, the first, faint blush of dawn was painting the horizon in hues of rose and gold. The air was still, cold, and utterly pure. It's time to go, he said, his voice a quiet rumble in the profound silence. The three women joined him, standing at the edge of their sanctuary. looking out at the newborn world. The mountain was no longer a threat. It felt peaceful, cleansed. It had tested them, and they had endured. They had entered the storm as individuals. But they had emerged as something more. Far above them, at the very peak of the mountain, a structure was now visible, a stark, geometric silhouette against the lightening sky. A series of arches and pillars. Impossibly ancient, impossibly remote. Spear pillar. Cynthia breathed, her voice filled with awe. Their destination was in sight. They were no longer just climbing a mountain. They were ascending to the very altar of creation. And they would face whatever awaited them there, together. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Altar of Nothingness. The final ascent was a climb into myth. The path dissolved, and they were walking on the very bones of the world, on flagstones that were not carved by hand but were set in place by the unimaginable pressures of creation. The architecture of Spear Pillar was a silent, screaming refutation of logic. Arches of dark, veined stone soared into the thin air, supporting nothing but the sky itself. Pillars, impossibly tall and slender, stood like the frozen notes of a divine song, humming with an energy that vibrated in the teeth. The light was strange, a thin, crystalline luminescence that seemed to come from all directions at once, casting no true shadows. Above them, the cosmic alignment had begun. It was not a simple eclipse. The moon, a perfect, charcoal black disk, slid before the sun, but instead of a fiery corona, its edge was limned with a soft, pearlescent glow, the light of Palkia. Simultaneously, the very fabric of the sky around the occultation seemed to shimmer and crystallize, a faint, diamond-like refraction of light, the presence of Dialga. Time and space were bending, their immense, slumbering power converging on this single point, this altar at the roof of the world. They emerged onto the final, vast platform, a wide, circular dais of polished obsidian that reflected the distorted sky like a dark mirror. And they were not alone. Lining the perimeter were a dozen figures clad in the sleek, advanced uniforms of Team Galactic. But these were no mere grunts. They stood with the unnerving stillness of zealots, their faces hidden behind polarized visors, their hands resting on the dark, menacing Pokeballs at their belts. They were the elite, the true believers. In the center of the dais was the source of their vigil. It was not a machine of wires and metal, but a thing of terrifying elegance. 3 pill, Lars of a material that seemed to swallow the light had risen from the obsidian floor. They pulsed with a slow, silent rhythm, and between them, the air was twisting, coalescing into a shimmering, spherical lens of pure spatial and temporal distortion. It was an anchor, a device designed to turn the convergence of gods into a key for a lock that should never be opened. And standing before it, his back to them, was a man. He was tall, dressed in a simple, severe uniform of gray and black that was more akin to a scientist's coat than a commander's garb. His hair was a startling shade of cyan, cut with a severe, geometric precision. He did not radiate malice or rage. He radiated an unnerving, profound calm, a stillness that was more unsettling than any threat. He turned, his movements measured and deliberate. His face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of emotion. His gray eyes, flat and passionless, surveyed them not as enemies, but as unexpected variables in a complex but solvable equation. The champion, the guardian, the empath, he said, his voice a perfectly modulated, dispassionate monotone. It was the voice of a man who had surgically removed his own soul. And the great anomaly. His gaze settled on Naruto. And for the first time, a flicker of something akin to academic curiosity entered his eyes. Specimen 0. Your life force signature is even more potent than Lyra's data suggested. A beautiful, chaotic cascade of uncontrolled spiritual energy. The perfect antithesis to our work. Cyrus, Cynthia breathed, the name a curse on her lips. We all thought you were lost. That you had paid the price for your madness. Lost implies an undesirable outcome, Cyrus replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. It was a smile of pure, intellectual satisfaction. I was not lost. I was enlightened. The distortion world was merely a chaotic echo of this reality. But I found a way through the echo. To the silence that came before the first word was ever spoken. I have stood in the primordial void. I have seen the perfect, beautiful, logical peace of utter non-existence. And I have returned to share this gift. You call this a gift. Alara's voice was sharp, a blade of faith against his shield of nihilism. You would unmake creation. You would silence the sacred song. A song implies dissonance, Cyrus countered smoothly. Harmony is just a pleasing arrangement of chaos. I offer purity, a single, perfect note of silence. A world free from the messy, illogical torment of spirit. Free from fear, from hate, from pain, and from love. All of the unpredictable variables that lead to suffering. An end to the flawed experiment of consciousness. He looked directly at Naruto, his gray eyes seeming to pierce through to the core of his being. You, of all people, should understand. You are the survivor of a world that tore itself apart with spirit, with emotion. Think of the pain you have endured. The loss. In the world I will build, none of that will exist. There will be only peace. The perfect, dreamless sleep of the void. It was a temptation, a cold, logical seduction. He was offering an end to a pain that had been Naruto's constant companion for a lifetime he could barely remember. But Naruto looked at the three women beside him, at Cynthia's fierce, brilliant fire, at Jasmine's gentle, unwavering compassion, at Alara's deep, unyielding faith. He thought of the roar of the Garchomp, the quiet loyalty of the Steelix, the warmth in the cave, the taste of clean air after the storm. Your peace is a prison, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. A life without feeling isn't life. It's just a machine. You're not a savior. You're just a broken man who wants the rest of the world to be as empty as you are. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed Cyrus's face. It was not anger. It was pity. You still cling to the chaos. A flawed variable to the very end. A shame. He raised a hand. The alignment is almost complete. The anchor will now begin the final sequence. It will use the concentrated spiritual energy of this place, the very thing you cherish, as the fuel to open the gate. Your faith will be your undoing. Begin. The elite guards at the perimeter threw their dark Pokeballs in perfect unison. The creatures that emerged were monstrous. A Tyranitar, its rocky hide inscribed with faintly glowing purple runes. A Scizor, its metallic shell unnaturally dark, its movements silent and insect-like. A Gengar that didn't cackle, but merely oozed from the shadows. They were void-touched, their spirits hollowed out, leaving only cold, efficient shells of power. We'll hold them off, Cynthia commanded, her own Garchomp bursting forth with a defiant roar. Naruto, the anchor is the key. You have to stop it. Steelix, we will protect our friends. Jasmine cried, her partner erupting from its ball, a bastion of solid, living steel. Alara, to the surprise of both Cynthia and Jasmine, produced a cherished ball of her own. This mountain does not yield, she declared, and from the ball emerged a Gardevoir, its form shimmering not with psychic power, but with a pure, white light. That was the antithesis of the void-touched Pokemon's aura. The battle for the altar of creation began. It was a clash of ideologies made manifest. Cynthia's Garchomp met the void-touched Tyranitar in a brutal, earth-shaking duel of raw power. Jasmine's Steelix, a fortress of defensive might, absorbed the silent, impossibly fast strikes of the Scizor. Alara's Gardevoir moved like a dancer, its on-blast attacks of pure fairy-type energy striking the Gengar, one of the few things that could effectively counter the void's shadowy nature. Naruto sprinted towards the anchor, a blur of motion. But Cyrus stood in his way. He held a single, masterfully crafted Pokeball. It is fitting that the great anomaly should face the pinnacle of logic, he said, and threw the ball. The Pokémon that emerged was unlike any other. It was a Weavile, but its fur was the color of a starless midnight, and its claws were not keratin, but sharpened, obsidian-like energy that pulsed with the void. It moved with a speed that made it seem to teleport, its red eyes burning with a cold, predatory intelligence. Naruto didn't flinch. He met the creature's charge head-on, his movements a symphony of controlled power. It was not a battle of jutsu. It was a close-quarters, brutal dance. He sidestepped a claw strike that would have disemboweled a lesser man, the void energy of the claw leaving a black, sizzling T-rail in the air where his chest had been. He countered with a palm strike to the Weavile's side, infusing it with a jolt of pure life energy that made the creature recoil with a silent, pained hiss. But as they fought, the anchor was reaching its peak. The lens of distorted reality at its center began to darken, the light of the two gods being drawn into it, consumed by it. A deep, Soul-shaking hum filled the air, a sound that was the auditory equivalent of absolute zero. The energy of Spear Pillar, its ancient, sacred life force, was being siphoned away. Jasmine cried out, stumbling as she felt the life draining from her Steelix. Alara's Gardevoir flickered, its light dimming. Cynthia's Garchomp roared, but its movements were growing sluggish. They were all weakening, the very spirit that powered them being used as fuel. Naruto felt it too, a cold, leeching sensation, as if his own soul were being drawn out of him. He blasted the Weavile back with a concentrated gust of wind, buying a precious second. He knew he couldn't win this way. Brute force was useless. He was trying to smash a hole in the ocean. The void didn't break, it simply consumed. He looked at the anchor, at the growing patch of absolute, starless blackness that was beginning to form in the sky above it. He remembered Alara's words. The azure flute, it resonates with the very pillars of creation. It wasn't a weapon, it was an instrument. You don't fight a song of silence with a shout. You fight it with a better song. Protect me, he yelled, his voice ringing across the dais. They understood instantly. With a final, desperate surge of will, the three women commanded their Pokémon. Garchomp, Steelix, and Gardevoir abandoned their individual fights and formed a protective triangle around Naruto, taking the full combined assault of the void-touched Pokémon. Naruto ignored the battle raging around him. He ignored Cyrus's cold, analytical gaze. He ignored the void-clawed Weavile charging at him again. He pulled the simple clay flute from his belt. He closed his eyes, shutting out the dying world, and reached inward. He poured everything he was into that single, focused point. The memory of his master's laugh. The taste of Ichiraku ramen. The pain of loss, the joy of friendship, the fierce, burning will to protect the new bonds he had forged. He poured his rage, his sorrow, his hope, his very life force, the chaotic, beautiful, spiritual energy that Cyrus so disdained, into the flute. And he played. It was not a melody. It was a single, perfect note. A sound that was the color of the dawn, the feel of warm earth, the scent of summer rain. It was the sound of life itself. The note spread from the flute, a wave of pure, harmonious creation energy. It did not clash with the anchor's hum. It enveloped it, resonated with it, harmonized with it. The pillars of creation, the very stones of Spear Pillar, began to vibrate, not with the anchor's draining resonance, but with Naruto's life song. The azure flute was not just playing a note, it was reminding the altar of its true purpose, not to open doors to the void, but to celebrate and sustain creation. The anchor's dark lens flickered. The siphoning of energy stopped. The patch of blackness in the sky began to shrink, not torn apart, but gently, peacefully, closing like a healing wound. The pillars of the anchor, unable to contain the pure, creative harmony, developed hairline cracks that spread, and with a final, resonant chime, they crumbled into dust. The void-touched Pokémon shrieked as the energy sustaining them vanished. They collapsed, their dark runes fading, leaving them unconscious but no longer corrupted. Cyrus stared, his face a mask of absolute, profound disbelief. His perfect equation had been solved by a variable he could not comprehend. His god, the perfect, logical void, had been silenced by a single, illogical note of hope. Impossible, he whispered, as the Weavile at his feet dissolved into shadows. The sea, house, the spirit, it should not be, stronger. The connection to his master, his source of power and purpose, was severed. The emptiness he had sought to impose on the world now flooded into him, a man who had made himself a hollow vessel. He dropped to his knees, his gray eyes finally, truly empty. The alignment passed. The moon slid away from the sun, and true, clean daylight flooded the altar of creation. The battle was over. The three women recalled their exhausted Pokémon, their bodies aching, but their spirits soaring. They looked at Naruto, who stood, flute in hand, against the backdrop of the rising sun. He had not won by overpowering his enemy. He had won by being unapologetically, fiercely, himself. He had answered a declaration of nothingness with a symphony of life. And in the clean, quiet air of the mountaintop, that was the only victory that mattered. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.